All right, I am back to talk about the challenge section here. So the challenge section that we have, as I briefly explained in the main video, is styling elements, styling HTML elements using classes and IDs. So you may have noticed one thing that stuck out in the code up here that we were talking about with the emojis that I purposely did not go into, which is that instead of just a normal paragraph tag like you saw right here, we had the start of that paragraph tag, but then an ID equals emojis before closing it. And the purpose of that is basically to say, I wanted that paragraph tag to have a different style, some part of a different style than all the other paragraph tags on the page. In this case, I wanted it to have a larger font size because I thought that it would be more fun if all of these were dramatically larger and stuck out a lot more than just the normal paragraph tag. So I chose an ID for that as opposed to a class because I knew there was only going to be one. This is the kind of thing that we do in order to apply these styles to just one thing. If we're going to have a bunch of different or just more than one of the same HTML element somewhere multiple times on our site. This is going to be really common for paragraph tags or image tags, because of course, paragraph tags are one of the easiest and best ways to put text on our site. And you certainly don't want to just have one run-on paragraph the whole way through. It gets broken up because you have images and you have videos and you have forms and you have emojis and you have all these things. So if you're going to have multiple paragraph tags, you very possibly will want some of them to have larger text or smaller text or different colored text or different spacing or all different fonts, all these different things. So, and we also could have images that you don't want every image to be the same size. Some of them might need to be larger or smaller or centered or not centered. Styling in CSS using classes and IDs lets us deal with all of that. So they both allow us to apply specific styles to just a subset of all of a certain type of HTML element on the page, all the paragraph tags, all the image tags, etc. The difference is solely that we use classes if we think we're going to have multiple elements that need to use the same specific styles we're setting up. We use IDs if it's just going to be one element. So in my case, I used an ID because I knew I was only going to have one paragraph tag that had emojis in it, that I needed this to be this large because I didn't want all of them. I didn't want multiple things on the page to be that big because it takes up a ton of space. So I was comfortable using an ID. If I was instead thinking, I would like to have several of the paragraph tags on this site have green text and the rest have white text, then I would use a class and I would put each paragraph tag that I wanted to be green in a class called, let's say, green. Might as well make it straightforward so we don't forget what it's doing. In this case, so, and that's down here, you can see how we would do something like that for an image. So you would set a class and call it something that you would recognize. So it's going to look very similar. It's just whether you're setting it as an ID on the attribute or as a class in the attribute. Now in our CSS, once we've done this, this alone does literally nothing. It's very, very useless because we set an ID or we set a class so that in CSS we can retrieve and refer to that ID or class. So if this is all we did, nothing would happen. What happens, or what makes something happen, is as soon as in our CSS we set this, which is saying it's a paragraph element, it has an ID of emojis. And then this all looks very familiar when you were styling paragraph tags. Normally, you have your brackets, and in this case, I set a large font size. You could also set this to be background color or a different color font or different boldness or a style on the font or anything else, different font family, anything like that. We use the pound sign or the hashtag if we're talking about an ID. That's just how it is. Again, you want to probably make your name, your ID, or your class describe roughly either what the specific element is or what giving it that attribute is going to do. So in this case, I called this emojis because all I need to remember is this is the paragraph that has emojis in it. I know from that I wanted it to have a large font size. I'll be able to go back in and find this very easily. If I was setting a class for multiple things, for example, images, and I wanted most of my images to be a certain size, but some of them to be smaller, then in this case, I literally call the class smaller because I want to be able to remember exactly what this does. If I look back through here and think, what does that class do? If it's called image2, it's not very helpful to me if I'm reading back through my code trying to remember. So if I call it smaller, and then in my CSS, I say it's going to be an image element. The class, notice the difference. So up here, if we have an ID, it's a pound or hashtag. If we have a class, it's a period or a dot. And then the name of the class, smaller. Then we have our brackets like normal. And in this case, I'm setting a height that is dramatically lower than the height I normally would set on images on a page, which might be 150 or 200 pixels. So it's half or less as much. And that would allow me, anytime I invoked image class smaller on an image, then it would apply this style. Now, the way this works for something like right here, you can see I actually already added these two paragraph tags up at the top. So one of them is my I am attended by, and one of them is my some of my favorite things. I decided I wanted both of their texts to be green, but I didn't want any of my other paragraph texts to be green. So I put the two of them, because there's two, not just one, in a class called green. Very creative, I know. And then down here in my CSS, I said, look for an HTML element that's a paragraph that's in a class called green. And anything that meets that criteria, make the color green. And you can see, you barely can see, because green on purple, it turns out, is not great, that the two lines up here are green. You can also see that right down here, I have this, here are some emojis that describe paragraph tag. That is still white text. And that's because the way the inheritance process works on styles is, so I set globally, we would say, I globally set the paragraph tag to have a font size of 20 pixels and a color of white. So by default, the starting line for any paragraph element that I add on this whole page is those two things. The only thing that changes that is if I become more specific somewhere about some certain paragraph tag, then the styles I create in that area override the same style that's been set on the global. So in this case, I said it's going to be a paragraph element and it has an ID of emojis. If you have anything like that, then I want the font size to be 45. So this paragraph that has the ID emojis, which you can see right here, the text is a lot bigger for sure than this, but you'll notice that the font color is still white because I didn't say anything to change that. I didn't say anything to change that. I only changed the font size. Otherwise, it's still listening to what was up here. It's just overriding this by the more specific style. Similar with the class green, if it's a paragraph element and the class is green, then the color is green, okay? Up here where I have my crazy green text, you can see it's green. It's not white like this says, but it's still 20 pixels because I didn't change anything down here. If I did change something down here, then all of a sudden now I have large, ugly green text on a purple background, but all of the other things stay the same. So the idea of classes and IDs is basically that you get to, we rarely want everything on our page to look identical. We rarely just want a bunch of paragraph elements that look exactly the same. We want to be creative. We want to figure out how we can make them interesting. And so this is the easiest way to be able to finitely control and change each of the things. So the challenge here is basically to see if you're really looking to go crazy, how many different kinds of styles could you apply to the elements you have in your website? Could you apply different classes that would change the, create a list maybe? Just literally throwing out ideas here. Create a list like this, but every list item inside of it is a different color. Now, right now, you'll see this is going to do absolutely nothing because I haven't said anything down here that it should do. But what if you did 7 or more elements in a list and each one was red and then orange and then yellow and then green, and down here you had all of those things spelled out as see how that red looks on purple. So you could literally just copy and paste this as you changed the colors all the way down and created classes for all of those. And if you didn't intend to reuse exactly this elsewhere, you could make each of them into IDs instead. And you could have list item pound red. And then this would be list item ID red, just in case you wanted to. So those are just some general ideas of things that you could consider doing. You also could write out a word with all rainbow colors. You could change image sizes to be all different things and see how they would fit together. You can change spacing on things. You can change fonts. So you could have a different font for every section of your site based on paragraph tag. Each paragraph tag could have a class or an ID that puts it into a specific font with that name, and then you change the font family. So you look like a page directly out of a directory of fonts that someone's looking to buy. All kinds of options. So for this challenge, the idea of trying to establish a bunch of different styles to see how neat that would look is great. This is also just really, really helpful to be able to know how to do, because it is going to be things that you'll want to affect specific styles. And so it's both a challenge right now, but it's also just a more advanced concept that will help you in all of your styling as we learn more elements to be able to style. Because as always, CSS works the same way for basically every kind of element. So even as we get more elements, they can always have classes and IDs and always be styled accordingly. So good luck. If you have any questions about this or about the main part of the lesson, please, please, please reach out by email, send a link to your project so that we can take a look. We can help you out. We can make sure you have something really fun and cool to show in about a week and a half, starting on Tuesday the 17th. And I will talk to you later. Bye.